Every single Mario Kart game has shortcuts, whether it be driving through this cruise ship in Mario Kart 7 or this insane wall clip in Mario Kart Wii. But in the last few years, Mario Kart 64, a game that was released over 26 years ago, has undergone a massive shortcut revolution. This is the story of that revolution. Before 2020, plenty of Mario Kart 64 shortcuts have been discovered within the time span of the game's release, such as this huge gap cut on Rainbow Road, this skip on Wario Stadium, and this insane trick on Choco Mountain called the Weatherton that allows for you to beat the entire track in less than 20 seconds. But one day, an unknown player by the name of Forest64 went into the chat of top runner Abney317 to share the discovery of a shortcut that would kickstart a revolution. Using these 3 red shells, Forrest found out that you can propel yourself up to this area right here, and upon Lakitu picking you up to put you back on the track, you are spawned in front of the finish line, allowing for your lap to count. Unlike most Mario Kart games, Mario Kart 64 doesn't have a checkpoint system, which allows for this to be possible. Now there are of course plenty of other quirks within the game that allow for it to work the way that it does, but I'll get into some of those in a bit. Considering that no one really knew who Forrest was, they didn't know what to expect next, but one thing was for sure, many more shortcuts were to come. On August 4th of 2020, just days after Forrest had initially discovered the Grand Prix shortcut on Royal Raceway, he discovered another on Toad's Turnpike. Essentially, if you get stuck out of bounds here, you trigger what is called the Lakitu effect. The Lakitu effect entails that you are able to drive out of bounds for a brief period of time without getting picked up again. Once this effect is triggered, if you drive to a lower section of the course, you are able to hit a plane, which is very important when it comes to pulling off this shortcut. You have to cross the plane to set up the rest of the shortcut and ultimately get it to work. The very next day, the shortcut would further be optimized, making it not only easier to set up, but faster as well. But before I get into that optimization, there's one important detail I need to mention. When it comes to the Japanese version 1.0 of the game, Lakitu will spawn you right here upon doing the Toad's Turnpike shortcut. This is not the case on any other version of the game. This means that through Japanese 1.0, the Lakitu effect is more exploitable given where Lakitu spawns you at, but as you'll see later on in the video, version differences within Mario Kart 64 serve to be quite the treat when it comes to breaking the game. Players would quickly hop the Toad's Turnpike to set new time trials world records, whether it be the 3-lap world record or the flap world record, also known as the fastest lap or single lap world record. Among these players, there would be one who accomplished something rather remarkable. A little over a week after the conception of the shortcut, a player by the name of Kyman would do something that was unheard of in MK64. Kyman was able to achieve the first ever sub 1 second lap, getting a time of 0.82 seconds. With the help of pausing, Kyman was able to make the aforementioned setup easier and in turn was able to achieve this insane lap. Given how insane this lap world record was, controversy would start to stir within the MK64 community. When Kyman set his world record, pausing was allowed, but after he set his world record, the legitimacy of pausing to make setups like this one easier came into debate. After 3 days of discussion, pausing would be banned from flap time trials, and eventually would be banned in 3-lap time trials as well. Regardless, this rule change didn't change the fact that Kyman was indeed the first ever person to complete a lap of Mario Kart 64 in under a second. Now you remember how I just talked about Kyman getting the first ever sub 1 second lap? Well, the task had other ideas. Within the same week, an improvement was made to the Wario Stadium shortcut. The original Wario Stadium shortcut was already very broken, as you were able to hop over this wall and then hop back over it to get the lap to count, but Forrest and another player by the name of David Wonn had something else in mind. Enter the 1 second Wario Stadium lap. It was discovered that you are actually able to get a lap activation while still being on the other side of the wall. This trick used to obtain the lap activation would go on to be coined as the delayed hover. This trick would eventually be pulled off RTA, with the current world record standing at a 0.94 by Martin Klassen and the current task standing at 0.91. This task of course being made by Forrest, but also Abney as well. About 2 months would pass and the spark that Forrest had ignited seemed to be wearing off, but when October 1st of 2020 came around, Forrest would once again show off a new shortcut, and this time it was on Sherbet Land. With the help of this penguin here, you are able to get pushed out of bounds, which allows for you to skip this entire cave. He is able to be put on the other side of the cave because him going to this area and reversing gave him what is called a section jump, which he uses to set up the respawn for the next lap. The reason why he does all of this setup is so that the penguin is in the right spot when it comes time for him to be pushed out of bounds. On October 3rd, something even bigger than a cave skip was found on Sherbet Land. Forrest as well as Weatherton would discover an entire lap skip on Sherbet Land. Essentially, instead of getting pushed out of bounds by the penguin near the cave, the task gets pushed out of bounds with this penguin over here, which causes a section reset. Since the section is reset, you have free will to do a lap skip here by driving through the finish line and then behind it again, meaning that we had once again another track where it was possible to get a sub 1 second lap. Now, if you remember earlier on in the video, I showed one of MK64's most famous shortcuts, this being the one and only Rainbow Road. However, an iteration of this shortcut would be discovered, and it wasn't just any small iteration. Forrest discovered that you are actually able to hop off of the track way earlier than the other one, and if you go far out enough, you're able to spawn all the way back to where you initially started. If you cross the lap backwards here, when 1,000 or more units away, the finish line deactivates, which allows for a lap skip when you get respawned here. I would say the world record for this track, but this isn't the end of Rainbow Road. When October 17th came around, Forrest made yet again another shocking discovery, but this time it was on Calamari Desert. At surface level, it looked really easy. All you're doing here is just driving through this fence. But in reality, the precision to pull off this trick made it seem almost humanly impossible. To pull this off, you have to land exactly on the fence, which in this situation is on the coordinate x equals negative 688, meaning the trick is not only precise, but floating point precise. Essentially, since this trick is floating point precise, it means that if you throw yourself at the wall, there's a 1 in 90,000 chance you actually clip through the wall. Now imagine if someone were to defy these odds and get the trick.
4, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Oh! No!
Mr. Pitt would get the clip, but after getting the clip, he would accidentally pause the game and quit out of the track, creating for what might possibly be one of the most heartbreaking moments in all of Mario Kart history. Nonetheless, he was still the very first person to pull off the clip, even if he didn't set a new world record with it. Months would pass, and another player by the name of Dossie would also pull off this trick, but this time, he managed to finish out the rest of the race with a new flap world record of 22.12 and a 3-lap world record of 136.27. Despite the insane luck that is required to pull off this trick, top runners within the community are still pushing Calamari Desert to its absolute limits, and Abney and Martin currently hold the 3-lap and flap world records. But I'll get into how those were achieved in a little bit. Another month would pass, and as players would continue to push this game to its absolute limits, renowned player Weatherton would post a task on November 20th that blew the community's mind. Enter the reversity doo-doo. Given the physics of MK64, you are able to launch yourself up from the lower half of the track here, all the way to the upper half of the track, where coincidentally enough is also near the finish line. Once he lands on the track, he does the reversity doo-doo. Now I'm sure you are confused as hell as to why doing this circle gets the lap to count, but I'll explain it later, for reasons you'll see later on in the video. For now, just know this is only possible on 1.0 and 1.1, and also know that things are about to get a lot more insane. When it comes to the timeline of this shortcut revolution, we are still in December of 2020, and Forrest would discover his last shortcut of the year on Frapp Snowland. Similar to the Toad's Turnpike flap setup, if you get a lap activation and cross back over the line and get stuck out of bounds, then the game will put you a lap ahead. So if you exit the track right before the finish line, then you'll be respawned where you initially were, but since the game put you a lap ahead, you'll be able to successfully pull off a lap skip. The last shortcut of 2020 would actually be a Grand Prix shortcut, and it would be on none other than Koopa Troopa Beach. This track was a rare case where, in its 2 decades of existence, never had any type of unintended shortcut. That was until Weatherton discovered this shortcut on Christmas Day. This shortcut was actually one that players had been working on to get in tasks for years upon years, but Weatherton would be the first to successfully get this rock hop, which of course requires a star. I think it's also worth mentioning that Weatherton is in 2-player mode here, but this does not pertain to the shortcut. There was no doubting that this rock hop was impressive, but a little over a month later, MK64 would see its first shortcut of 2021, and it too would be on Koopa Troopa Beach. A player by the name of SoftSyrup was digging through old Japanese websites, and he came across one that was labeled as a 2-player only Koopa Troopa Beach Grand Prix shortcut, even though it was slower. Keep in mind that this was discovered around the late 90s, early 2000s. SoftSyrup would go on to share his findings with Abney, and Abney would go on to attempt the cut on stream. He would unfortunately have no success when it came to making the cut faster. However, a chatter by the name of Grill suggested an adjustment to Abney that would involve you driving out of bounds to get the placement he needed instead of just manually setting it up. This not only allowed for a large time save, but it made Abney the first person to hit any shortcut in any mode on Koopa Troopa Beach. Abney's time would of course be lowered, and the current world record stands at a time of 16.36 by Brody, while the fastest task of the shortcut is a 16.20, also done by Brody. If it wasn't clear already, MK64 was in the midst of a thriving shortcut revolution. However, when February 9th came around, there were not only 2 new shortcut discoveries, but the discovery of 2 mechanics thanks to Weatherton and Forrest. Whenever there's a corner in MK64, the 2 wall hitboxes meet at a joint corner, but beyond the corner there is an opening. If you're in front of the corner hitbox on one frame, and then on the next frame you're on the opening beyond the corner, you're able to drive right through the corner of the wall. Now this sounds rather simple, but when we consider speed as a variable, it becomes a lot more complex. In an open corner of walls, the bigger the angle is, the less speed you need to go through it. So if we consider this wall in Mario Raceway, we can see that the angle between the 2 walls is 135 degrees. The minimum speed that is needed to clip through 135 degrees is possible in time trials, but since there is also a void within the walls, you need to not only get the speed you need to clip through it, but do a hop so you can make it to the other side and finish the lap. Essentially, it was now possible to drive through walls, and the task for the flap would be brought down all the way to a 9.62. The other shortcut would be on none other than Luigi Raceway, and this time, the shortcut wasn't just a Japanese 1.0 exclusive, but a Japanese 1.0 and 1.1 exclusive. On Luigi Raceway, there's a green area that extends for quite a bit on the the straightaway of the track, but the caveat here is that it works differently on the Japanese versions of the game. This difference being that this area actually has collision, while on the other versions of the game, you would just fall through the area if you happen to get on top of it. Now, if you hit the wall here at the finish line, in this specific area with a shroom, your cart briefly clips into the wall and touches the aforementioned green area. This area is mapped right above the tunnel, so when you do this clip, the game believes that you're inside of the tunnel. So when you clip back out and end up on the other side of the finish line, the game is convinced you drove a full lap. Now, you remember how I was talking about 1 second laps? Well, when it came to Luigi Raceway, the task was 3.25 seconds for the 3 lap and 0.01 seconds for the flap. Considering that those are the times for tasks, you would think that the RTA times would be quite a ways from the task, but it only took a day for people to get under a second on the flap record, while the current flap record stands at a 0.04 between these 4 players. When it came to the 3-lap world record, a player by the name of JCP would get a time of 11:56, making this not only the fastest 3-lap race in Mario Kart 64, but the fastest 3-lap world record on all of mkworldrecords.com. Now on Yoshi Valley, there is this infamous shortcut where you can jump over this fence, get a lap activation, and then respawn by the finish line to do a lap skip. However, with this new task done by Forrest, he found that you were able to save 0.07 with a better respawn, which you can get by taking the far left path, then not doing the hairpin jump, then using a shroom to get a vertical bounce over the fence instead of bouncing to the left like the shroomless fence jump. 0.07 seconds may not sound like a lot, but it was huge when it came to MK64, and there was more to come on this track anyways. For now, let's take a look at another track that never had a time trial shortcut within its entire history. Enter Bowser's Castle. When July 15th came around, Forrest, who is not only known for his shortcut discoveries, but his joking demeanor upon these discoveries, posted a task made by him and Weatherton in which it seemed like a non-shortcut task, but in reality, it was another open corner clip. This clip was way more difficult to say the least, and the reasoning for this is that height plays a factor when pulling off this shortcut in particular, because you are jumping off a stair, meaning your height changes as opposed to Mario Raceway, where height doesn't matter considering you are on flat ground. To this day, no one has been able to beat the non-shortcut world record with this clip until this happened. Now I think it's time that we not only take a visit down memory lane to the track that kickstarted this revolution, but introduce a new mechanic to the game. This mechanic would be none other than the Ultra Bounce. Weatherton would premiere a video on his YouTube channel in which he discussed the Ultra Bounce. Whenever you are falling, you can end up going partially inside in the ground if you get the right frame spacing. If you are at least 1.7 units into the ground, the game will automatically bounce you out of the ground. But if you press R on the same frame that the game catapults you out of the ground, you can get a large bounce. Normally, when you jump and are in midair, you are unable to jump again until you hit the ground. However, Weatherton explained that if you hit a wall after a large bounce, your jump state gets reset. When you hit an area in which the floor and wall meet, you're able to press R again, meaning you could jump again. This allows for you to get an even bigger bounce, hence creating the Ultra Bounce. So on July 24th, after Weatherton premiered his explanation, he would then go on to showcase a shortcut on Royal Raceway that involved the Ultra Bounce, in which he would bounce his way up to this wall here. After landing on the wall, the game decides to spawn him all the way over to this ramp here, allowing for 5 to 6 seconds to be saved over the old shortcut. Later on in the Ultra Bounce video, Weatherton would also explain a theory he had involving Calamari Desert, but went on to stress how he was only able to pull off the trick with cheats. Just 2 days later, Forrest would post this task of Calamari Desert. This discovery was huge, as if it were possible in real time, it would eliminate people having to go for fence clip, the trick that had a 1 in 90,000 chance of working. After some time, people came to the conclusion that the trick was not possible in real time. That was until October 1st, 2021, when renowned Mario Kart player IMath would attempt to pull off the shortcut, and miraculously, he was able to not only pull off the shortcut once and get a new record, but get 6 new flap world records and 2 3-lap world records with the trick. Keep in mind, this was all in one night. Over time, people would realize that this ultra bounce, which was now coined as the Desert Tanko, was not as difficult as anticipated, and as of the time of this recording, the 3-lap world record stands at a 37.74 by Abney, while the flap is a 7.32 by Martin K. Not even a week later, on August 1st, Weatherton would post a task in Grand Prix mode in which he did a completely new shortcut on Yoshi Valley. However, just 3 days later, Forrest would post a task of him pulling off the trick in time trials mode, which allowed for laps to be completed within under 3 seconds. The task was eventually able to get lowered to 2.13 because of a later lap start. Like the Desert Tanko, this trick was thought to not be possible because of the sheer precision of the trick. Even with a bunch of runners attempting the trick, and some runners even getting close, this trick would remain tasks only. That was until August 29th, 2022, when SoftSyrup streamed some live attempts and within a short time frame was able to successfully pull off the shortcut. On the same day, VAJ would also pull off the shortcut and lower the record. A week later, Abney would also pull off the shortcut and lower the world record. The same day, a player by the name of Alec would do something legendary. He would pull off the trick on lap 2, allowing for him to get a sub 3 second lap. This world record was going to stand for a long time. At least that's what people thought. You see, later on in the year, Abney would do some attempts and go on to beat Alec with a time of 2.75. You may notice that the lap didn't flash on the screen upon him finishing it. That's because he was playing on the Chinese exclusive console for the fun of it. Of course, playing on this version doesn't affect the shortcut, but Abney just wanted to get the first world record on the console. Now remember the Ultra Bounce in Royal Raceway? Well, an iteration of the bounce would be introduced on January 8th, 2022 by none other than Weatherton and Forrest. Basically, you would do the initial Ultra Bounce, but once you go to the ramp, you would do a series of hops to go backwards on the ramp. You then land on the track below, get a large bounce, and hop onto the wall and do 4 very precise and perfect hops so that you can land on the stadium and then hook off of the stadium so that you can get a lap activation and effectively save 5 more seconds. Unlike the other shortcuts, it is very unlikely we will ever see this done in real time because of the 4 frame perfect hops that you have to do, but only time will tell. Time would pass and shortcut theories would continue to rage on, but on February 10th, shit got real. A brand new mechanic was once again introduced to the community. This mechanic would be coined as pause abuse. Now, do you remember the Lakitu effect that I covered at the beginning of the video? Well, pause abuse made it so that you could theoretically have the Lakitu effect last for an indefinite amount of time, meaning that you could travel out of bounds as long as you please. This is because each pause extends the Lakitu effect by a frame. If enough pauses were able to be built up after going out of bounds, then the potential for shortcuts would once again skyrocket. Enter Moo Moo Farm, a track that previously did not have a time trial shortcut. It was shown off that by getting stuck in the fence at the end of the lap, you could use pause abuse and jump over the fence again to extend the Lakitu effect. You could then drive out of bounds next to the line and launch yourself into the water in the middle of the track. After landing in the water, you will get placed by the bridge and be able to finish out the rest of the lap. With this newfound knowledge on pausing, new discoveries were also made on Frap Snowland. This shortcut on Frap Snowland included pause abuse at the line while simultaneously doing a loop. This idea would later be expanded upon with more optimal looping. Despite this shortcut only being done in tasks, the shortcut also made its way over to the 3-lap category with a time of 15.88. Now, before I get into the last few shortcuts, I think it's worth mentioning 2-player pause abuse. Since you have 2 controllers plugged in, double the amount of pauses are able to occur. This allowed for 2-player only shortcuts that took advantage of pause abuse. These shortcuts, of course, being on Frap Snowland, Moo Moo Farm, and DK's Jungle Parkway. 4 months would pass and there were no new shortcuts found, but on June 22nd of 2022, Forrest would post an image of himself achieving the illustrious 13.32 on Rainbow Road, a time that seemed to be impossible to achieve given the aforementioned 13.33 shortcut flap world records. Well, as it turns out, Forrest had found another place on the track to do a shortcut that saved time. It would involve jumping far behind the finish line to get a lap activation when you are nearly out of bounds, followed up by driving the rest of the way to the finish line. Forrest intentionally slowed down at the end just to get a 13.32 for the meme. Later that night, Forrest would post a real task, which led to a 12.50 flap. A few days later, Forrest would achieve a 12.30 through task, which was then improved in 2023 to a 12.24, which is where the task stands today. Even though this looks rather simple, this way of doing the shortcut was absurdly precise. Forrest would go on to post a setup for the trick, but alas, the setup was a joke, as it was not even in the realm of human possibility. Now, we've been through multiple years of shortcuts, and even though the revolution may still continue to rage on, the last shortcut of this revolution and of this video might possibly be the most insane shortcut that we've covered yet. So sit back, relax, grab some snacks, and let's take a deep dive into this last shortcut that would be on none other than DK's Jungle Parkway. Upon starting a race, you are able to clip through the tree background by clipping this corner in the wall, which puts you in an area that you are normally not able to get to. From here, you have to not fall off the track and not touch the tree background again, otherwise you'll be back to square one. Staying in this area was so difficult that even TAS failed to stay in the area. If you drive to the right spot, you have to jump forward so that your cart goes over the cave, in which you must get hit by a fruit at the right time, and reverse so that you could come back onto the track, but this time you will get stuck out of bounds and be a lap ahead, allowing for a sub 1 second lap to be possible. It was then once again demonstrated that another 0.01 second lap was now possible, but as far as pulling it off humanly, we might never see the day. To wrap up the video, I thought I would end off by mentioning 2 shortcut ideas that are in development as we speak, just to prove that this revolution is far from over. The first one being on the infamous Frap Snowland. In a video posted by Forrest on December 20th of 2022, he described an idea known as a river bounce. If you could find a way to launch across the snowbank and river, make it to the other side, and furthermore make it to the bridge, a 1/10 of a second can be saved on the record if you set up the flap like the world record does. Keep in mind that this time was only thought to be possible with pause abuse. However, this is very difficult, and so far, there has not been a task video of Forrest or anyone else successfully making it to the bridge. The other idea is useful for a Luigi Raceway shortcut 3-lap record. It involves only having to set up twice instead of 3 times and getting a bounce to activate 2 laps at once on your second lineup. Forrest says that this is slightly slower for now, but has potential to be faster for real-time runs. It's only a matter of time before our minds are blown again, but for now, this has been the Mario Kart 64 Shortcut Revolution.